This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Lime Designs. If the name sounds familiar, that's because it's my design business and the work I do there helps make this podcast possible. If you love colorful and whimsical art prints, greeting cards, and journaling stickers, then head over to my Etsy shop for a delightful browse. Just search for Fine Lime, like the fruit, designs, all one word, on Etsy, or click the link in the show notes. And now, on with this week's episode. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. I'm your host, Melissa, and joining me today is my lovely semi-regular co-host, Heather Travis. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Melissa. Happy Wednesday. Today,
Yes.
That's the day we're recording.
We are recording on
day.
a Wednesday, which is kind of usually our usual day to record, I think, isn't it? It's kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, but yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we dive into today's episode, which I am really looking forward to. And the first thing is just to remind everybody that June 24th will be the last episode of season 3 of the podcast. And then we will be taking a summer hiatus through July and August as we normally do. And we'll be back with brand new episodes the first Friday after Labor Day. So during that time, during the summer, I will be replaying, is that how I say it? Replaying some older episodes that I think are just really great episodes. And there's a couple in there that are going to directly relate to prepping for the busy holiday season because
that's what we spend our summers doing.
That's basically it when you're a maker. So, Heather and I thought it would be a great idea to do an episode today on implementing boundaries within your business, your family, and your life. And it just seemed like a really great episode to kind of do as we wind up the season and we're all sort of heading into summer, where I know a lot of us really like to try and make time to, especially if you've got kids, you want to have some time with your children, or you want to spend time with family, friends, you want to get away, maybe do some camping, go on a trip. And so that can all be really hard to do if you don't have boundaries in place in your business. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about all the different types of boundaries to think about in your business. And I think as I was prepping for the episode, and Heather and I just had a brief little chat about this before we started recording, perhaps the toughest part about boundaries isn't setting them, it's enforcing them.
Yes.
It's so easy to say yes to something that's maybe outside of your usual boundaries, and then say yes to maybe something else, and then all of a sudden you're saying yes to everything, and it all kind of falls apart. So so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And Heather, how are you at setting boundaries for yourself? Are you good at it?
I used to not be really, I was really bad at it. And I have gotten a lot better over the years. And I would say my boundaries, I was really good at business boundaries, personal boundaries, not so much. And then when my business and my home, like particularly, I would say in the move in the past 3 years, because my business is in my home, I
Hmm.
create in my home, in my studio, I share a lot on Instagram. I have I have had to sort of break down and rebuild some boundaries
Hmm.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very, very common.
Yeah.
Definitely when I worked in the corporate world, boundaries was a whole different thing.
Yeah.
But once I started working for myself, and like you said, I think once your business is in your home or you work from home,
Hmm.
it can be so easy for all the boundaries to start to blur
Totally.
and all the different parts of your life start to blur. And before you
Yeah.
know it, you sort of feel like you're never totally at home, but you also never totally leave work. It's
Yeah.
just a big mixed up
Yeah.
mush. So,
Yeah.
yeah. We've made a list of all the different places that we think boundaries are important and places where you can think about them. And these are in, well, they are kind of in a particular order. Now that I'm looking at the list, they are kind of, but these are not meant to be things that you have to follow. It's more to just get you thinking about
Mhm.
where you might want to implement boundaries in your own business and your life. And it's also, I think, going to depend very much on how you work. Everybody
Yeah.
works a little differently.
Hmm.
So for some people, certain boundaries might not even be an issue, but for other people, they might really be the difference between being very productive and really struggling to be productive.
Hmm. And I think, funny enough, what's really helpful about all of the stuff that we're going to talk about is that, and I know for me, a lot of boundaries have been a journey into realizing that I needed that boundary.
Yeah.
There were things that I'm like, they consistently would upset me, piss me off, trigger me, something. And until I realized that I actually had the ability to say, no, you're not welcome here,
Yeah.
like muting those people on Instagram, not engaging in that conversation, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until I put that boundary up that I realized, hey, wow, I could just like stop this whole trigger from even
Yeah.
starting, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't need to pour the baking soda into the volcano. Like,
No, you don't. And I think as women, we're often, not always, and not all women, but I think often we tend to be people pleasers and we
mhm,
kind of work from this place subconsciously or unconsciously where we want to make sure everyone around us is happy.
yes,
Often at the, and often what comes of that is that everybody around us is happy, but we're not.
correct, correct. And in fact, I, as a child of divorce, who tried to people please in both families that I
Mm,
hop, skipped, and jumped between, that was a big one for me, even in early work days for
yeah.
boundaries, where I would realize that my goal marker for a successful event or doing well at an event was pleasing everybody else and meeting everybody else's
Yeah.
expectations and not giving a flying fuck about myself.
Yeah.
And that was a huge mistake. Huge mistake, right?
And I
And
think that's
and
incredibly common,
mhm,
unfortunately.
yeah.
So, yeah, and I think experience is part of it. I think this comes with experience, and I do
Hmm.
think as you get older, you get more comfortable just saying, "Yeah, no, that doesn't work for me." Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and I did an episode on burnout a couple of weeks
Mm,
ago for those of
yes.
you who had an opportunity to listen. And one of the things I didn't really talk about in that episode because it was a whole episode in itself was how important setting
Yeah.
boundaries was for me to pull myself out of that cycle of
Yes.
burnout. Boundaries was huge, and
And
that
not
was the
only pulling yourself out, but making sure that you don't slide
fall
back
back
into that.
in, yes. And that was a really new experience for me because I was somebody who really struggled to say no prior
Hmm.
to that. So,
Hmm.
yeah, and the first place, and it's also the first thing on our list, where
Hmm.
I really had to work hard to put boundaries in place was around my workday.
Yes.
So, I think there's a lot of, in each of these things, there's a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself. And I think the first one is what kind of workday do you actually want to have?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do you want?
Yes, that's a big one. And does it, like, I know when I first started working from home, I was trying to make working from home fit into the 9 to 5
Mm,
box, and that doesn't work for me when I'm sitting in a room in my house. And so I really ebb and flow. But interestingly, a boundary for me, a very firm boundary, is email communication. So I still stick to the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, normal business email communication because I feel like that's other people's boundary, right? So a lot of my clients are working corporate jobs and they're literally in an office 9 to 5. And so their email boundary, or at least the boundary that I would assume I would want if I was in their job, is don't email me after hours or expect that I'm going to respond to you after hours.
mm-hmm.
And so I try, so even if I have an email that I'll draft on a Saturday because I'm working, I save it as a draft and then I send it on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me. Yeah.
That's a really interesting one. And I think you also have to think about the message you're sending out if you email somebody at 11 o'clock at night.
Yes.
And I have, in my previous business, we did a lot of work with big Toronto PR firms. And I'm on the West Coast, so my email rule is also 9 to 5. And so very often the last thing I'll do, or that I would do at the end of the day, would be to just check my email and follow up on anything that needed to be followed up on, particularly because I knew that a lot of the people I was responding to would be in the office 3 hours before me. So if they could have an answer when they got to work at 9 o'clock, that's great. They can get on with their day. But I cannot tell you how many times I would get a response from some poor young PR assistant late. And at first I never said anything, but after a while I just started replying and saying, I appreciate the response, but it's 10 o'clock at night for you. Like, you shouldn't be working.
Yes.
And it really made me uncomfortable. And it sent a really vocal message about the companies that those people were working for, where that seemed to be what was expected of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I didn't like it. It certainly screamed out, if I ever go back to work, it won't, like, if I ever go back to work, if I ever go back to a job, it won't be there.
And I think, funny enough, what we're talking about right now, we're talking about setting our own boundaries, but I think this I think is super key in setting your own boundaries, but having your boundaries respected, is respecting other people's boundaries.
Yeah.
And so, you can't expect, if it's one way, right? If I can barge in on you, but you can't barge in on me, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. Yeah.
Yeah. That was another thing that used to really irritate me, is the amount of emails I would get from CEOs or VPs, assistants, expecting responses from me. And I am a CEO, right?
Yes.
I'm not going to respond to your assistant's 6 or 7 emails during the day, because I'm on the same level as you. And so if you want to have a conversation with me. Don't do it through your assistant. That was something that used to drive me batty. Like,
oh my gosh. Absolutely. Yes. And I'm totally with you.
And that is not meant as a slight to all the amazing virtual and executive assistants out there. It's just that, like, take a look at what it is you're trying to do. If you want to have a top level conversation with a decision maker in a business, then show up as the decision maker in your business. Like, yeah. So anyway, that's one of my little rants. I'm so glad I'm not doing that anymore. But I think it is important to take a look at what works best for you. So we've been talking about the 9 to 5. I am not a 9 to 5 person. I'm not a morning person. I am a night owl. But that's when I am firing on all cylinders.
Oh my gosh, that's when I'm like trying to keep my eyes open.
I know you're an early bird. I am not. I don't function before 9:30. It's just so when I left my corporate job, going to work for myself, that was one of the things that I immediately put in place. I just let myself sleep when I want to sleep. If that is 2 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the morning, then that's when I sleep, you
Yeah.
know?
I think that's a big one. I really do. And I think particularly for creatives,
Hmm.
allowing yourself, funny enough, both a boundary and the flexibility
Hmm.
to, like, for me, one of the big things is, like, people will say, you're in your studio all the time. Yes, I am, because I do work for clients, which I have very firm boundaries around, but
Hmm.
I have literally no boundaries around my creativity.
Mm.
And so, with exception to if a client meeting is when I want to paint, I have to take the client meeting because I have to take the client
Hmm.
meeting. So yes, I guess there are boundaries, but to me, I love, that's the beauty of working from home, is if I have an idea, I can just trot upstairs to my studio and execute. And I don't need, it's not like I need to be like, oh, can I have time off work this afternoon to work on this painting?
Hmm.
Like, I'm the boss. And I said, Heather, you have time to work on this painting. Or for instance, last week, Brian and I cut out, it was 37 degrees on a Tuesday, and we both literally played hooky and went to the beach for the day. And it was
Yeah.
awesome.
One of the
Yeah.
perks of working
One of
for
the perks.
yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as much as I am a night owl, like we were just talking about, I don't send emails out at 11 o'clock at night. Like,
No. And you're not asking for meetings with clients at 8 o'clock at night because it's
no, no, no,
better
no,
for
of course
you.
not. So
Exactly.
I do work around my client schedule. Fortunately, in the last couple of years, since I've transitioned away from what I was doing before, most of my
Mhm.
clients are self-employed.
Yeah.
And so they tend to work very flexible hours as well. But
Mhm.
I also, and this is something that more and more of us are starting to experience, because I'm on the west coast of the continent, a lot of my clients are in earlier time zones than me. And so
Oh, yeah, that's
4
interesting.
or 5 o'clock in the afternoon for me is after hours for them.
Yeah.
So there are definitely times where I have to get my butt out of bed early
Right.
to have a conversation or to record a podcast episode or whatever it may be, because
Mhm.
I'm working with time zones. So that's something to keep in mind, depending on who you work with and where your customers
Yeah, but
and
even when you
clients
make
are.
that choice, like that flexibility that you allow yourself, you're still respecting your boundary, right? You're not,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yes. Yes. And they're more exceptions than rules. And I do think there has to be room for exceptions. There are.
for sure. Otherwise, like, it's too, to me, it's too rigid. There
Mhm.
can't be, I mean, there's, of course, there's certain things where you're like, for instance, I have strong physical boundaries. Like, if I've never met you, please do not try and hug me.
Me
That's not
too.
going to go,
Yeah.
I'm going to like karate chop you. It's not going to end well.
Yeah.
Uh, so I mean, there's certain things where there's a very firm line in the sand, but other things there, I think, particularly when it's work patterns, working with clients, working with other people, everybody has different boundaries. So in order to respect everybody's boundaries, sometimes you have to say, well, mine will flex a little over here if yours will flex a little over
Yeah.
there. Right.
Definitely. Definitely. One of the other interesting things I noticed when I quit my job, my actual job, like back in 2010, is I thought, okay, like my day is my own. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. And it took me, I'd say maybe 4, 5, 6 months to realize that no, I actually do need a schedule.
Yeah.
And I think I really rebelled against that in the early days because I was so sick of people telling me when I could take lunch and when I was allowed to leave the office and
Yeah.
when I had to show up and when I had to go home and all,
Hmm.
like the more I look back on it, the more I felt like I was in elementary school.
Yes.
You know?
It's like the summer I decided I was not brushing my teeth because people told me to do it too often. So I didn't.
Oh, lovely. You must have been a
I know.
treat to be around.
I got 6 cavities that summer.
But yeah, exactly. It was just like I'm going to do things whenever I want to do them. But I realized that yeah, it didn't take me long to realize that I do need structure,
Yeah.
but the freedom comes from being the person who gets to decide what that structure is.
You know what's funny? I'm totally with you. I'm literally looking at I'll call it a bullet journal. It's not really. It's just a really nice journal with Melissa's lovely stickers serving as my date and calendar, which is love. Like, the rainbows make me so happy. I look at every week is different, but I've made the schedule so I know what's coming. I know what to expect. And then for me, even though my schedule is kind of willy-nilly, in setting it, I know now where my boundaries are for the week and what I can give and what I can't give. Right. So
Exactly.
I'll look at my week and be like, I can't give any more this week. If Melissa says, "Hey, can we do a podcast episode?" I can't this week, or I can this week, because I know what it looks like. I've set myself up and I manage myself within myself. Funny enough, it's like boundaries to have boundaries. The big boundary issue that I have, particularly when it comes to work, is my family. And I think that's our next item on the list. Is it not?
It is. I was just going to say one thing before we move
Oh,
on to
yeah.
that, though, is that one of the things that I do in terms of a schedule is I do have set days where I do specific tasks.
Ah,
And
yes.
I have very firm boundaries around those. So Mondays are my admin and bookkeeping and CEO days, and like where I work in and on my business. And I
That's
do
very
not
smart.
take phone calls, meetings, podcast recordings. I don't do any of that on Mondays. And that because admin stuff is really hard for my brain. And I need to be focused on it. I can't be pulled in different directions. So
I
that's
was just about to say, and if you're like me, which I know you are, when it comes to some of those things, if a podcast recording could come up and displace one of those things that you don't love doing and
yeah.
keep moving it to the bottom of the list, it'll very easily do that. I think that's one of the funny things about boundaries, is that like you have to respect your own boundaries, that this is the
Mm-hmm.
day, for this is the thing I need to get done.
Yeah, and understand how you work.
Yeah.
And that can take time. For me, knowing that all those things are done on a Monday means that even if I have a crappy week, well, at least at the beginning of the week, I got some icky
Yes.
tasks done, right? Like I accomplished something. And then I also, Fridays are blocked off in my calendars. And that is my day where they're like a freebie
Yeah.
almost,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's, I can catch up on work. I can take the afternoon off. I just leave them very loosey goosey, but I also don't allow phone calls or meetings on those days. That way, because I'm very introverted. And
Mm.
so doing things like calls and podcast interviews and meetings are incredibly draining for me. So even if I have
Yeah.
one meeting first thing in the morning, that's it for the day. Like
I was just about to say that's your whole day.
that's my
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
if that meeting is in the afternoon, I
Oh,
spend the
no, no.
whole morning thinking about it.
Yes. It's like when company's coming over and you're like, I could clean under the toilet one more time. Like, yeah, I'm
Yes.
totally with you.
Yeah, so if I batch those all into one day, that's my exhaustion day. And
Yeah.
it's done, and I don't have time to get caught up in getting too caught in my head thinking about the next
Yes.
call or the next meeting or that kind of stuff. So that really helps me. And the other thing I just want to mention in that before we move on is, what do you do when it comes to planning actual creative time? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
this is really important in our business. We're all creatives.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have time for creating. And that, for me, tends to be the first place where my boundaries slip.
Yes. Ditto. Ditto.
And I don't think that's unusual, because I think for a lot of us, our creative time, where we're actually creating, is like happy fun time,
Yeah.
like the super happy terrific hour from
Yeah.
Seinfeld.
Yes, it totally is.
You almost feel guilty when you're
Yes.
painting or you're drawing or you're writing or whatever. It's like, because
Mm-hmm.
this is fun. And so that tends to be where my time can be pulled away from me very easily if I'm not super careful about it.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
And
a tough
I
one.
I also find sometimes I'll pull away because I'm doing other things, and then I realize like I literally haven't used a paintbrush in 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that's crazy.
Yeah.
Um yeah. So I tried to have like a daily art practice. I can't to me that sometimes the forced creativity puts me in a negative headspace, because
Interesting.
I'm still very, I love when things hit me and I just get to run with it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes forcing it and having nothing jump out. Every once in a while I'm like, what are you doing this? You're not an artist. You can't like blah 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 blah. And then I'm like, Heather, wait for it, Melissa. Heather, just shut the fuck up, right? Like, and right, which is
Yes.
anyway, but that I envy people, I really do, who have a productive daily art practice, and whether that productivity moves them forward or backward, and then forward again, like whatever it does for them, I'm very envious, I think.
Yeah, one of my goals this year was to spend an hour a day creating at the beginning of the day, and I did really, really well with it up until the end of March. And April and May, I definitely have been struggling.
Mm,
And not because I don't want to, but because other things have come up, and
yeah,
it's the first thing that goes out the window.
yeah. But I think, funny enough, and you and I, like, you're creative in your garden, you do lots of creative, and I do too, right? Like, I play with
Mm,
power tools, I do things. And so I've started to give myself actually a lot of grace in not picking up a paintbrush maybe in 4 days,
mhm.
because I did something that was totally creative, but
It was
just in
filling
an,
your well, just
it,
in a different way.
that's exactly
Yeah.
it. And so, building things, doing things,
Hmm.
rearranging things, decorating things, that all fills my cup up. Making food fills my cup up,
Yeah, that can all qualify as doing something creative. Yes, so definitely you really need to think about the type of day and the type of business that you want to run before you can put boundaries in place.
Yeah.
And I think that leads us into the next thing, which you were about to jump into, which is family and friends, your boundaries with them,
Yeah.
because that can impact your business as well as your
Big
social
time.
life. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting question for people to ask themselves is how welcome is your family in your business?
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and I'm single, so, I don't have to worry about that stuff.
But even extended family, like I know, and we had to set it as a firm boundary. We have, you have frank conversations with parents about the business finances or something, but we'll have to say to them, like, explicitly, this information, like, look me in the eye, this information is for your ears only,
Yeah.
right? Because then, oh, I was telling so and so about, and you're like, what did you just say to me? I told, like,
Hmm.
no. And so that was a big one for me, was, and I still do it truly. Anytime I bring up anything business related that is sort of internal business to friends and family, I state categorically, this is for your ears only. I do not want this repeated,
Yeah.
because that was a big one for me. I kept hearing things, they would come back to me. Oh, I heard from your mom that, and I'm like, what the fork? Like, and it just killed, like, to the point that I'm like, you realize you could ruin my business. You realize, like, that
Yeah.
confidential, that, like, very, and sometimes it's just, you're not taking me seriously. So you're sort of gossiping about it. And that,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah, that's definitely. I know my ex, he was incredibly supportive of me and my all my entrepreneurial ventures, but I do remember him once offering to invest in one of my businesses. And he was coming from a really good place
hmm,
when he said that, but I was like immediately felt the pushback on my end. I was like, nope,
yeah,
nope, nope. And I knew immediately that's a boundary. Your
yeah,
money is not you. Yeah, I don't want you having, not that he would ever have tried to
right. Like, dramas
pull,
doodle this way. Yeah,
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 or
yeah.
pull rank or something because he's invested in it. But I just didn't ever want that to be
No,
something that came.
no, because a financial boundary is a big one.
It's
Whether
a
you have,
huge one.
yeah, like whether you have a written agreement that the person is a silent partner, whatever, that can impact how, like, it can impact how you're making business choices, because that's now a factor, right? And if
It
that,
does, and
yeah,
it can easily sweep over into your personal relationship. It really made me think about if I were to ever have an investor, and I think in the type of work that I do now, that's not something that would ever come up. But you never
yeah,
know, right? Like if you
yeah,
wanted to, like say for you, if you wanted to suddenly become the fabric maven of North
yeah,
America, you would probably have to involve some kind of investment.
yeah. And I would
And
go to the bank, not
yeah,
myself. Yeah,
exactly. So that's do you want to borrow money from your significant other? Do you want to borrow money from your parents? Do you, or your kids, or
Yeah, and even funny enough, and one of the things, I mean, my family has been very good. My friends have been even better. Uh, for me, and this, I think a lot of creatives encounter this boundary is do they expect work for free? Do they expect work at a
yes.
discount?
Oh, I didn't even
Do
have that on the
they?
list, but that is such a good one. Yes.
Yeah. And so I like my parents, any paintings of mine, like other than ones that I did in high school, any paintings of mine, they've paid cash money for. Same thing with my girlfriends. And I really respect the fact that there was no question. Like, it's not like they were trying to get it for free and it was an awkward conversation or anything like that. But funny enough, for me, the boundary with friends is I will, because I can, and maybe it's a little bit of my love language, but because I can do something, I'll often be like, well, I could help you paint that, or I could do that mural in your room. Oh, don't worry about it. You just pay for the paint. You know what I mean? And so, and friends will push back, like, which is so lovely. They're like, can I please just be? And then some of them are like, I'm not listening to you. I'm e-transferring you money, like,
Yep.
which is wonderful. But I'm the one saying, and I really should be like, no, this is my fee for the mural. But I think it really is, for me, that's my love language for if I can do something for you, I'll try.
I'm similar because I'm very much a helper, but I learned
Mhm.
very, very early on that money has to change hands.
Yeah.
And it's not because I don't want to give my friends things.
Yeah.
It's just, first of all, if I say that I'll do something for you and I don't charge you, very often that means you go to the bottom of the queue.
Yes.
And that's not even intentional. It's just that I know I have to deal with the people
Yes.
who are paying me first.
Yes.
And then I feel awful because I'm dragging my feet and you keep getting pushed to the bottom. And it's the same when I do something to support a friend. I want to pay because A, I want to support them, but B, I also want to be taken seriously as a customer.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's important. And so, I do firmly believe that money should change hands when you're working with friends, whether it's for them or supporting them.
Yeah.
And I do believe that contracts should be signed, depending on the type of work that you're doing,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yes.
If friends are buying product from me, I'm more than happy to generously discount it, and those kinds of things. If they're raising money for a charity or
Totally.
something and they need donations, I'm super happy to be all over that. But, if a friend of mine writes a book, like when Lisa wrote her book, I pre-ordered a copy as soon as it spit it out, Lisa. As soon as it was available for pre-order. And Lisa was like, "Why did you do that? I'll give you a book." And I was like, because you're my friend and you wrote a book. Like, the least I can do is spend the $29 to get a copy of it.
Exactly. And it's funny. It's those moments when you have, and I had a girlfriend, I had a webinar that I was hosting and I had a couple spots open up because I hadn't sold out. And so I sent a note just to my circle and said, like, hey gals, it's happening tonight. If any of you have time, here's the link, join in, whatever, like, whatever. Next thing I know, I have e-transfers from two girlfriends who are like, here you go, here's the webinar fee. And I'm like, no, you missed the point. You can join. And their responses from both of them were, we love you and we want to support your business.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I think also when it comes to family and friends, okay, so this is a big one for all the moms out there. Because I know so many of you struggle with this, is your children.
Yeah.
Not to imply that your children are a huge problem. That's not where I'm coming at this from.
Those little monsters.
But being a mom, especially when your children are younger, and running a business at the same time is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for moms to think about what the boundaries are with their kids in their business. You do have to protect your work schedule. That's a boundary to think about. Like, are you going to have your children in daycare during the summer. I have a lot of mom friends who are self-employed, who will still put their children in daycare 1 to 2 days a week during the summer, just so
Yeah,
they
for
have
sure.
2 work days that are
Yep.
uninterrupted.
Yes. I have girlfriends who are stay-at-home moms and don't have full-time jobs who still put their kids in daycare
Yes.
for two
Oh,
days a
yeah.
week
Yeah.
just so they can get groceries and like house cleaning done
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's hard to juggle all the things. And I think, parent, no parent, respecting those boundaries, even if you're caring for an elderly parent, caring for relatives, have a new puppy. I think one of the big things is setting the boundary, but also giving yourself permission that if your kid gets sick and
Hmm.
that's it, you're dealing with runny noses. You can't make the thing. You're not going to meet the deadline. That saying it's okay and truly being honest with your customers. I've got a runny nose. I'm not making the deadline. Here's the new deadline.
Yeah.
Boom. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think that transparency, you don't need to reveal all the details, right? But I think, and saying that this is now, I'm implementing this new boundary. Respect the fact that I'm taking care of my child.
Hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another one to think about is how welcome are your kids in your studio or your workplace?
Yes.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And do you have systems in place that make it really easy for them to know when mom can't be disturbed and when it's okay
Mm-hmm.
for mom to come in or
Yeah.
to come in and join mom? And, I have friends who have set up little workspaces in their studios where
Mm-hmm.
their kids can come and sit and make art with mom
Yeah.
or
Yep.
play or whatever while you're
Mm-hmm.
working. During the pandemic, one of my friends, both her and her husband were working from home, as so many people
Yes.
were, and she has a young son. I think he's 6 or 7 now, who was obviously not in school. and they set up some really incredible systems to make things work for him. So he had a tablet. They gave him a tablet and they set up alarms on the tablet for different things. So he had an alarm when it was snack time, and he had an alarm when it was time for him to sit down and do some work for half an hour. And then he had an alarm for when it was time, when it was free time or playtime.
Right.
And then there was another alarm like, this is when mom and dad are free, or this is when dad is free, but mom's still working, or mom is free,
Yeah.
So he sort of lived by these iPad alarms, and he could see when they were like, it gave him some visuals and
Yes.
also some audible sounds to let him know when the next thing was happening,
Yeah.
and to let him know that mom and dad were busy or whatever. And I've also had friends who have put stop signs up on
Yes.
their door. Green means
Yep.
come on in, red means stay out,
Mm-hmm.
unless the house is on fire, and yellow
Yeah.
is like, well, if somebody's bleeding, you can knock.
Yes. And I think too, funny enough, and it's like it's the back to sort of what we said at the beginning, but it's my boundaries and your boundaries, right? And so a big thing in my house growing up was if your door is closed, that means that you have to knock and ask permission to enter.
Yes.
And so if that is the rule for your bedroom, that should be the rule for my office.
Yeah.
And if it's no knocking because I'm on a call or recording, going through, and I think that's the big one, particularly, if you have kids in the house, but I do it when I have my husband in the house, and I'm working from home, is I will lay out, here's my day today. I can pay attention to you this time, and this time. I cannot pay attention to you here.
Yeah.
And this is what my day looks like. And so it's very clear there's no knocking on the door. When is it lunchtime?
Yeah.
When can I have a snack? And I'm talking about my husband here. I'm kidding.
No, I mean, my dad lives with me, and he
Yeah.
can't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. So I can tell him 100 times, I'm going to be in a meeting, don't come
Yeah.
in, and he just won't remember.
Yeah.
And so I have to put a sign on the door, like, if you come in, you're going to be on video.
But I think too, and that again, it's respecting other people's boundaries, but also giving grace, not, and it's not something I know that you broadcast, but I would say that any client who's worked with you long enough, if your dad were to interrupt a meeting, you're like, oh, it's Melissa's dad. Oh, well, Like,
Yes,
whatever.
I let people know straight up.
Yeah.
Like if there's a possibility he'll interrupt us. I was asked to be on a live podcast a couple months ago, and I said I'm happy to do a pre-recorded one. Like they wanted video, and I'm like I'm happy to be on video, but not live because I can't guarantee
Here's what I'm doing.
that
Totally.
my dad won't come in, and I don't want him to
put him
in that position where he's on live TV or on
Yes.
a live camera that
Without
can't be edited out without
Yes.
his permission. That leads us into another set of boundaries for family and friends.
Yes.
So much of our marketing as creatives is on social media.
Yeah.
And so what are your boundaries around including your family and friends in your images, your reels, your stories, all your social media content? Like, do you include them in that? Do you have your kids in it, but you never actually show their faces? Or are they just not ever on camera? And do you have their permission to include them? That's a big one. That's respecting their boundaries.
Big time.
And I've found with most of my friends, when their kids are younger, they're dying to be on camera.
Yeah.
But once they become teenagers, they don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And I've known a few moms, particularly in the parent blogging space, who have shared their kids' lives from the moment they're born. And then all of a sudden their kids hit 12, 13, and they're like, no.
I'm done with being the Truman Show.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mom.
All of a sudden these moms are like, I don't have content now.
Yeah,
like it's
and
a
that's
weird
like
thing.
your child should not have been your content, first off. But and that's, funny enough, I've been very public. I've struggled for years to have children. So one of the big boundaries that I set for social media was, there's certain people who the way they talk about their kids are this like marketing appendage. I unfollow them because it just triggers me left, right, and center. And so, but there's lots of people I follow on Instagram who show, so there's people who I, know and love, and I know their children, and they are, private accounts, and I follow their antics and running through the sprinkler in the summer because they're my dear friends. So of course I pay attention.
That's totally different. And that's the private accounts. Like that's meant for family and friends. That's like who you'd send Christmas snapshots to 20 years ago.
And that's exactly it. But it's the public people. They're people, they still share stuff with their kids, but it's not, I have no idea what their kids' names are. They're, most of the time it's not so much that the kid is there, it's that the kid is helping. So here are hands helping, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm very cautious. And even funny enough, between Brian and I, like I'll say to him, do I have your permission to put you in this video? Do I have your permission to tag you in this post?
Yeah. I mean, my partner absolutely flat out refused. And so you never saw him on social media ever. I barely ever even refer to him because he's very private and just, nope.
That's exactly it. And that's like, I think even for my girlfriends, I have some girlfriends who are very public on their Instagram, just like I am. And so I tag them in posts. They tag me in posts. Like I tag you in posts. If you were just a private person and I was just going to have a phone call with you and not record a podcast episode, I would not have tagged you in the post that I'm going to
totally different.
Right. And so I think that's a big one. And I think funny enough, particularly for social media, I'll say sort of influencers, content creators, we tend to forget that other people on Instagram in our friends and family circle are not on Instagram the way we're on Instagram.
Yes.
And so there's a big, not only difference in how we play the game, but also what our boundaries are and what they look like.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. One person who's been really interesting to watch, she was actually a guest on the show last season, is Lisa Lee from The Viet Vegan.
Yes.
So she's a YouTuber, and she's very active on Instagram and TikTok, I believe. I'm not really on TikTok, so I don't see her there. But she records all aspects of her life. And
I love Lisa's account.
She's great. And she had a baby recently. And she talked about the whole pregnancy and everything as she went through it. But once the child was born, she still to this day has not revealed their name. She has not revealed their gender. And she's made it very clear that she will not be doing any of those things until they are old enough.
Because and this is the thing to her, and yay, I love the fact that I sent her a note and I was like, go girlfriend, because this is, to me, that was so important, because it does not, as the audience, what does it matter whether her child's name is Dick or Jane, and whether it is a Dick or Jane? Like, it is of no consequence.
But what was fascinating was how much pushback she got.
And that to me blows my mind. And that goes to show, I think, a lot of and funny enough, it's similar to that divide between influencers and non-influencers on Instagram, is that we're playing a different game. But there's also, like, I get messages from people and it's the first time they've ever sent me a message and they just dive right in there. Like the recipe, please, or the, how much is that painting? And you're like, hello, my name's Heather. It's nice to meet you. Like, we've never talked before, but you have, just because you followed my stories silently for a year doesn't mean that I know who the F you are. Right. And so a lot of times people will feel, and I think that's why as creators we get pushback when we put these boundaries up, is because they feel that we've put our whole selves out there, when in fact we have very much not.
No.
And so I've seen, and I feel like I've talked about it before, but there's a bunch of influencers that I follow, creators, home decor bloggers, designers, all these people who, they have a highlight reel on their Instagram called Boundaries.
Ooh,
and
interesting.
Yeah,
no, I don't think you have mentioned that.
Yeah. So Carmion Hamilton, who is, I'll make sure that it's included in the show notes. She has an amazing HGTV show, Reno My Rental. She's like super talented decor designer, but she has very firm boundaries. And when I started following her, one of the things, and she literally says it, I would say weekly in her stories, she'll say, and if you're new here, check out my boundaries highlight and then check out the about me to get to know a little bit more.
That's an interesting idea. I like that.
Yeah. And I love that. And then Terry Moore is another one. She's Timor Home. She's a decor blogger out of, she's a designer, I should say, out of Nashville. And she's very firm on her boundaries too on social media. And I'll say too, like, even me, I'll do it when I'll post a story and I'll say something and I will, like, part of me is like anticipating the clapback that I'm going to get. And so I'll say, and don't at me or don't DM me with blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, I've just put that boundary up. Don't come at me with that shit. And then if people do, my response, if I choose to respond, because sometimes silence is the best weapon, I will say, I specifically said not to at me with this. You have crossed a boundary. And send.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't pay attention. But it's a reminder for people, like, you just crossed a boundary. I'm just letting you know once nicely.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I mean, you have to do that in all aspects. When people have crossed a boundary, you need to let people know what the boundaries are and be very clear about them. And then if people do cross a boundary, like, what good are they if you can't enforce it and say to somebody, you just broke my boundary? That's not cool.
Yeah. And we're just about to get into client interactions, which is where it's so critical to communicate your boundaries. When people are paying you money, it changes the dynamic a little bit. And so it is really important when you're working with clients or customers or however you refer to the people who give you money, depending on what you do. It is so important to be upfront about that before you accept the money.
Yes.
So that everybody understands what the rules are. And it's also, if you have a boundary that is really important to you, put it in your contract.
Yes.
So it's there, so you can refer to it. But for you to come up with a boundary halfway through a project, is not fair
No,
to your customer or your client
because
or
that's actually not a boundary, that's a reaction. And if
yes,
it should be a boundary,
you need
then
to
it's
make a
it's
note and turn it into a boundary for the next client.
that's exactly
Yeah.
it. It's a hard lesson to learn, but you're
Yep.
gonna use it the next time. And that's why Melissa said the word contract a bunch of times. I use contracts. I have scope of work documents.
Hmm.
Even when um, I just got a commission from a friend. And so I don't do contracts with friends because I just am a trusting person, but I still have a trail of DMs in Instagram that says, this is the fee, this is when I'll deliver, this
Hmm.
is what you'll pay, like it's still very clear on expectations in terms of managing expectations. I think
Yeah.
that's the big thing for boundaries, funny enough. It's like managing expectations
Well,
around
that's
things.
what a contract is.
Yeah.
It's, we sit there and we hear the word contract and we think lawyers and legal stuff and blah,
Mm-mm.
blah, blah. But really, all a contract is just laying out what's going to be done, who's going to be doing it, and what the rules are
Yeah.
for both parties. And it's
Yeah.
just as much about what your rules are and what the client's rules are. So it's really important if you're selling, like online, like let's say in my case I make prints and greeting cards and stuff. So
Hmm.
those people aren't clients, they're customers. That's sort of my distinction. A client is
Hmm.
somebody, if I was to do a commission or when I'm doing graphic design work, they're
Right.
clients. They're hiring me for a service. So with customers, it's a little bit different. You're not going to have a contract every time somebody buys a
Hmm.
greeting card from you. But it is important on your website, and I believe, I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this, but I believe in Canada that you are required to have a privacy policy and a terms of service on your website.
Oh,
Um,
fascinating. I do not.
yes, so I believe it's required. So anyway, that is where you can outline a lot of that information is in those 2 pages on your website. But it's also things like if somebody DMs your page on Facebook for
Hmm.
your page for your jewelry, you can there's tools on Facebook that allow you to set up instant replies.
Yep.
So if you are only available to answer questions between 9 and 5 Pacific time, then you can set up an auto responder that pops up
Hmm.
and says, "Hey, we're away until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Like, we'll get back to you then. Just leave your
Hmm.
message," kind of thing. Set those
Yep.
things up. Otherwise, you
Yes.
wind up with somebody sitting there going, "I sent you a message 8 hours ago and you haven't replied."
Yes. Or my least favorite, we get this at the bike shop all the time. Somebody will send a message and then like 10 minutes later, the next message comes in and it's just a question mark. And I'll tell you, if you listening are a person who sends just a question mark as a DM or a
Oh my
email,
goodness, that's a surefire
somebody
way
needs
to
to
make me
take
go.
off their shoe and hit you over the head as hard as they can. It is literally the rudest thing
So
ever.
rude.
So rude.
um,
Anyway, but that's a big one. And that set that boundary, set up that schedule. And even like, I don't give a lot of people my cell phone number. And
yeah,
so
that's
you can DM me on Instagram, you can email me, you can contact me via my website. There's a lot of ways you can reach me. One of them is not my cell phone via my phone. Like,
be very careful around giving clients your cell phone number. It opens
yeah,
you up to receiving text messages at all hours
yeah,
of the day, night, and
yeah,
in between.
yeah. And even funny enough, like because I work from home, when I, on my drop down as part of my, purchasing on my website, you have the option, obviously, to have it shipped to you. You have the option to have it local drop off, like I would take it to your house, or you have the opportunity to pick it up from me, local pickup. And the address that I put in the local pickup is actually our community post office around the corner. And it isn't until I have that person's money and I've received confirmation of the sale that I then say, here's my actual home address. And even in some cases, I will say, the address provided is our local post office. What time would you like to meet there?
Mm-hmm.
Because, for instance, it's a man purchasing the painting. And now, most of the time, I'm pretty comfortable. I do Facebook Marketplace transactions and have people come to the house. And I live in a small town, pretty pretty safe. And my spidey senses are usually pretty good. But in the rare occasion that my spidey senses have said, don't give out this address, just meet them at the post office, I'm glad I did. Not that I felt that the interaction was weird or anything, but it's just a boundary. Like,
it is, and it's so important to think about that. Porch pickup and all those things became so popular during the pandemic. But you really do want to give that some thought. Like, do you want people coming to your home to pick up, or are you more comfortable delivering? And do you have a safe meeting place where you could meet people?
Yeah.
And that's if you are going to meet people, do it somewhere public and safe, like your local post office.
Like your local post office, and tell people that you're having those meetings. I'm meeting a person here. Yes.
The most important thing about all of that is that you really need to communicate those boundaries ahead of time with clients and customers so they know what they're getting into before they pay you. I think that's really important.
Yeah, for sure.
We talked a little bit about social media already. That was next on our list. But I think there's a couple of other things to think about with social media, just in terms of social media, both as a business and as a user, but also from a mental health perspective. And the reason why I brought this one up is because I am struggling so hard with Instagram right now, with social media in general, but Instagram in particular. I am finding it very difficult to show up. I have stopped scrolling the platform. Like, I'm very disengaged from it. And I think I just need to be away from it for a while. I don't know, but I think
I really limited, funny enough, I was feeling the same way you are. And I did two things that have freed me. And maybe they'll help you. One is I went and unfollowed a bunch of people. I was following people for wrong reasons. They didn't make me happy. They've changed the focus of their content. It no longer engages. They had a kid. That's all they talk about now. Unfollow. So I unfollowed a lot of people. I then sought out other people with interesting and diverse feeds that fueled me. So I've started roller skating. So now I'm following like all these roller skating accounts on Instagram. And it's like filling my flipping cup up every day because these people are so awesome and I learn so much. But also, I think, and I did a post yesterday, like there's been lots of talk about the grid being dead and the algorithm. And I kind of I had a thought yesterday and I was like, I'm going to go back to the way I started using Instagram a decade ago, which is I'm going to post whatever the fuck I want, whenever the fuck I want. And I don't care if I get 1 like, 2 likes, or 10. I'm just going to be here for me. And that was like a very freeing, and like, I don't care. I'm no longer going into my insights. Like, I don't get paid by my insights. It's not like I'm a blogger who's getting paid by that information. So why do I even care about it anymore? Like, I'm just kind of.
Yeah, I've muted and unfollowed so many people, so that part's taken care of. And I follow a lot of really cool people, but I think what I'm struggling with is the platform itself. I just find logging in, opening the app up on my screen, it is so frenetic now. Like before, it was just nice still images and you could scroll through, and I found it very relaxing and enjoyable. But now I have short videos that are designed for super short attention spans. And I've got things flashing at me, and I've got and if I have the sound on by accident, then it's just like sound clip after sound clip after sound clip, and they don't mesh. And I'm on 2 different versions of Instagram. It's really interesting. The podcast account is on a completely different version of Instagram, a newer version of Instagram than my other accounts. And the podcast, I can't even go in. Images do not show up as square anymore. They're trying to make everything look like a reel. Yeah. And so you can't read the caption anymore on an image. You have to, it is horrible.
And you know what I've noticed, funny enough? So if somebody has multiple stories, you get like 3 of them and it'll say 3 of 24, and you have to hit the show all in order to actually see all the person's stories. Yeah. And that I find, and they switched it. Like I get so many ads served up to me, and unless I tap onto
And all the
actually
suggested
following,
posts.
exactly.
Like at least you can mute the suggested posts for 30 days, and I keep having to do that because I
Yeah,
don't care.
I know.
Like I don't care. I'm following the people I want to follow. Stop.
No kidding.
And a lot of the stuff they suggest is just stuff I do not care about.
No
So just
kidding.
from a user perspective, I am really finding it just not a place I want to be anymore.
Yeah.
And so I've definitely zoned out from Instagram, and it makes me sad because it was my favorite social platform. I loved
Mm.
scrolling through pretty things all day,
Yeah.
but I don't feel like that's what I'm doing anymore. I feel like now it's just it's half the
It's
people
too
I've
much.
it's too much.
And I think, funny enough, a big boundary for me for social media this year was actually determining what platforms I was going to be on. I cut
Hmm.
off all my, so I deleted Facebook. I got rid of a
Hmm.
bunch of excess things. I even, as much as I love TikTok, I decided like none of my audience, I was never getting any sales from TikTok. I just have
Hmm.
fun. I just have fun on TikTok. And so for like actual business, I decided Instagram and LinkedIn are my two main
Hmm.
focuses, whatever. That's where I was going to put
My
my
two
energy.
main focal points.
Exactly. That's where I was going to put my energy. And I like having that boundary as opposed to saying I'm going to be all things to all people on all platforms was really helpful for me. And in even protecting my time, like that,
Yeah,
it
that's a
was a
big
big
one with
suck
social
on
media.
my time. Yeah.
Yeah, I have very firm limits around social media and email in terms of when I'm allowed to be on
Hmm.
them and
Hmm.
when I'm allowed to engage and do all that kind of thing. And it is one of the places where I slip. Like, if I am procrastinating or I'm bored,
Oh yeah.
social media is the first thing I pull up. So I use a little app called Forest that blocks those sites for me when I'm not supposed to be on them.
Oh,
And
smart.
I can grow little trees like every time it's kind of a take on the Pomodoro technique.
Yeah.
You can grow a tree for 30 minutes, and if you disrupt the tree while it's growing, you wind up with this dead tree in your forest, which nobody wants. And I'm very proud of my little forest. I don't have any dead trees yet this year. So
That's too funny.
anyway, that definitely helps me stay out of places I'm not supposed to be. But I'm very strict with it with email. I check my email first thing in the morning. I check it before I wrap up for the day, and occasionally I'll check it at lunchtime. And I have all notifications removed from my phone. The only thing I get notifications for on my phone are text messages. Like
Interesting.
I don't get Instagram, I don't get Facebook, I don't get email. I don't even have my work email on my phone. And one of my big things is Facebook DMs.
Mm,
I do not like working with clients in Facebook DMs. I
no.
hate it. I have had to work really hard to push
Yes.
clients to email me because
Yes.
for so many reasons. First of all, like Facebook has always been my escape place where I
Yeah.
just
Yes.
hang out with my friends. I don't want to be friends with my clients on Facebook
No.
unless we are friends in real life.
That's my rule on people send me by, so it's funny enough, it's a boundary.
Hmm.
You cannot be friends with me unless you have either sat in my house for a meal, I have sat in your house for a meal, or we have sat somewhere together for a meal.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you are not my Facebook friend. That's where
Yeah.
I share all the vacation photos as opposed to just the one where I look really good in a bikini on my Instagram.
Exactly. So, and you know, as in terms of working with clients and customers, I need records of our conversation,
Yeah.
and Facebook is not the place I want to have them. I
No.
want those in my email.
Yeah.
I need to be able to refer back to what we talked about 2 weeks ago when it comes to where
Hmm.
you want something placed in your ebook or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like, it's just, and I feel like when you open up your Facebook DMs to customers and clients, and I'm not talking about your Facebook page.
Hmm.
That's different. That is part of your
Yeah.
business. I'm talking about your personal Facebook
Yeah.
profile.
Yeah.
I feel like once you open that up to customers and clients, that's a really hard door to close.
Big time.
And you are just, yeah, you're just opening yourself up to being available like you would be to your friends and family.
Hmm. And
And
that's funny enough. We have a tricky boundary at the bike shop because a lot of retail customers will end up like they're very similar to us, and so it's hard not to be friends with
Oh, I'm
them.
sure. And, Brian is a cyclist. I'm sure he's part of the cycling community. And so,
Exactly.
like, what's the line between the people you're friends with in your community and the people who are your customers?
Yeah, and that's a
Very
tricky
blurry.
one. And
Yeah.
it's very blurry. And then it's, what expectations do they have of each other? And
Hmm.
it's tricky. Boundaries particularly, and I think this is the thing, Melissa and I are both over 40.
Hmm.
Boundaries are something that come with time. Like, I don't think anybody in their 20s has all of their boundaries at all figured out for their person, for their social media, for their business. Like, a lot of the boundaries that I think you and I have discussed, those came
Time
through
and experience. Yeah.
time, experience,
Yeah.
and some hard lessons.
Yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Absolutely. Like, this isn't our first rodeo.
No.
And it is definitely something, and part of it is just learning who you are and
Yeah.
how you work. And I think when we're in our 20s and our 30s, we're trying to fit in. Well, I'm speaking from my own experience, but just from conversations I've had with friends as well, I know that I'm not alone in this, is that
Hmm.
you spend those years trying to fit into this mold that was kind of
Yes.
always there in the background as a kid growing up, like in
Yeah.
terms of what kind of work
And
you would do.
exactly.
Yeah,
Meeting others' expectations.
exactly. And it really took me a lot. I think in some ways, people who are a generation below us, so like millennials and then Gen Z,
Hmm.
have been brought up to function. Function's not the right word, but there was more emphasis on the individual
Yeah.
for them growing up than it was for those of us in Gen X and beyond, where it was
Yes.
very much about fitting in to
Yes.
the norms, right?
Yes.
As opposed to being allowed to be the exception. And so I think for a lot of us, we are very much in that position where, we just, you just want to fit in. You don't want to be
Yes.
the outlier. You don't want to be the
Yes.
one
And
that, you
even
don't want to be the
funny,
difficult one.
no, and funny enough, even thinking back to, like, I don't want to say like the shaming words, because that's not really, but the words of, like, Heather, you don't want, and it was never, you don't want people to think you're weird or you're X. It was always, Heather, you don't want people to think that we're a bad family, or that we're the X family, or that we're the messy family or the loud family. And so it was never about me. It was about maintaining the collective expectation of, like, my behavior directly impacts how people see my family. And
Yeah.
so that was a big one for me.
Yes, when it comes to all these different boundaries that you want to have in place, you have to remember that part of why we're self-employed and why we're creatives is because we wanted to be able to do things our own way.
Yeah.
And part of that really is about setting the boundaries to make sure that you can have that type of business. If you don't set boundaries, then you might as well just go back to a corporate job,
Yeah.
really, where somebody will set them for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think my biggest lesson in boundary setting is and I think we touched on it earlier, but don't make boundaries as a reaction, like in the moment. You need to, like, recognize that this is something that should be a boundary in the future. And
Yes.
that's part of that learning process, right? Like,
Yeah, after every project or every interaction or transaction, ask yourself,
yeah.
what could have been smoother? What didn't sit right? What did I learn from this? And adjust your processes accordingly for the next time. If you have repeat clients or customers and you've changed how you do things, just communicate that to them before you start working with them again. Just say, listen, since we last worked together, I've changed things up a little bit, and this is what I'm doing now. Is that okay with you? Or actually, don't even ask if that's okay.
Don't even ask.
Because then you're opening it up for them to creep in on your boundaries. But just say, like, I hope that works for you. If not, and you don't want to continue on with the project, I completely understand.
Yeah.
But I'm being very firm on this.
Yeah.
And most people are pretty good at understanding that, things change. It's some people may have an issue with the boundary you've put in place, but that's their issue, not yours.
I was just about to say that's a big one. And I think a lot of times we'll think to ourselves, oh no, am I being too strict on this boundary? And a person's reaction to your boundary says everything about them and nothing about you.
Yeah.
And that is also a lesson that you learn over time, right?
Yeah.
In terms of,
I have definitely chosen not to work with people because of some of their boundaries, but that's because their boundaries aren't working with my boundaries, right? So, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But they communicated to me their terms before we went forward, and it was up to me to make the decision whether I accept those terms.
Yeah. And sometimes boundaries, funny enough, as you're saying that, I'm like, well, pricing is a boundary for me. Somebody comes and they're like, my limit is $500 for this project, and my minimum is 1,000. Therefore, our boundaries don't meet.
And that's okay. You
Exactly.
You just simply, and I know in the early days, because we've all done this, when in the early days when you need the money, you drop your boundary to work with the other person's boundary, and very often it doesn't work out for you.
Correct. Exactly.
But yeah, if they are not your ideal customer, then it's better for everyone if you move on. And it is very interesting because you will get people who will push back, and some will be quite nasty or condescending. So it's really important to start putting these things in place and to revisit them constantly as you refine, as you change, as your life situation changes. You might be listening to this right now and you may not have kids, but 2 years from now you do have a kid, or you have a parent living with you, or you have a health issue, or something has come up where you need to put some boundaries in place. And so it's really important to just constantly revisit these things. And I think it's also important to put boundaries in place for your own physical and mental health, which we didn't really get to, but those are really important. And one of the reasons why I put boundaries in place around when I'm available via email or when I'm on social media, those are directly related to having experienced that year of burnout and needing to put those boundaries in place for my mental health. I end my day, my work day, my public facing work day at 5 p.m.
Right.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Right. Yeah.
And I get up from my office and I leave it, and I very rarely go back into my studio until the next day.
Interesting.
Very rarely. Doesn't mean I don't work. Like, I'll still draw and I'll still occasionally peck away at things on my laptop and stuff, but it's not in my studio. I might do it in my bedroom. I might do it on the deck, depending on, but I need a firm close to my day. That's something I learned.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a very particular boundary for me is our bedroom, is literally for sleep. Nothing.
I know a lot of people who have that. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't even, if I'm reading a book, unless I'm sick, which knock on wood, I haven't been sick in a bunch of years, but unless I have like a cold or something, would I read in bed? But I don't. It's like a sacred place to me. It's just for the bedtime activities. Yeah, it's not it's not for anything else. There's no television in our bedroom, and it depends. And this is the thing. This is I think the genesis of this whole conversation is boundaries are all about you and what you need in your life and business to feel safe, respected, get the money that you need, find the time and creativity that you need, all of those things. But they're so personal. They're so deeply personal that my boundaries, Melissa's boundaries, and all of your boundaries, sure, there's going to be overlap, but this is why, everybody's boundaries are different, which is why the expectation, you have to be clear about communicating those boundaries, because my boundaries are different than your boundaries because I am a different person than you. Yeah.
And it's just important to understand that the person you're working with will have different boundaries because they're different from you. Yeah. And so, hopefully your boundaries overlap where it's important. Yeah. And I do think there are times to be flexible, but you need to be really careful with how flexible you
Yeah.
are. Like,
Yes.
I don't believe in bending over backwards for things, because I know how badly that goes for me. Other people might be able to handle it really, really well. I'm not one of them. So my flexibility is very minimal. It might just be, and it's usually for very special occasions, you know.
Yeah.
The important thing to remember with all of this is you can put all the boundaries in place that you want, but unless you stick to them, they don't work.
Correct.
So you really do need to figure out a system to protect the boundaries that you put in place, both for business and personal, because it's so easy once you slip to have that turn into a landslide.
Yes.
And before you know it, you're right back to square one and everything's chaotic and you're not happy. You are disorganized, you're uncomfortable, you're anxious, and it just turns, it just becomes a mess.
All the things.
So yeah, it's really important to put them in place, to find ways to protect them, to be really firm. And so this is one of the things, I remember this conversation so clearly. It was with a girlfriend. It was several years ago, and she was overwhelmed with things that she was being asked to do. She does a lot of volunteer work. She also works. She's one of those people, you know, if you see a busy person, ask them to get something done, because she's one of those people. People know she'll get it done, so they're always asking her to do things, and she really struggles to say no. And this was shortly after I had been dealing with all this burnout, where I had really had to come to terms with saying no to things. And I said, every time you say no to something, you're opening up the door to say yes to something else.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's not no, 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 no. It's no so that I can say yes.
Yeah.
And she had never looked at it that way. And I think that really helped her. And I think that's important to remember. When you say no to this, you are saying yes to building a sandcastle with your kid at the lake this week.
Yeah.
When you say no to this, you are saying yes to the client with a bigger budget.
Yeah.
So it's really important to remember, it's not, no is not no.
Yeah,
No
it's not the only option.
No, exactly. No is simply something that you say so that you can open up other doors.
Exactly. So it's funny. I always think of it as, and I love Marilyn Smith said this years ago at an FBC conference when she was talking about her second city. And I loved the yes and, right? So in improv, it's always yes and.
Yes.
But that, which is so, I, in my personal life, that's the way I sort of am. Like if a friend says, do you want to do something? The answer is yes. And like, to me, that's the enthusiasm I come to my friendships with. Whereas the business, to me, it's not yes and, it's no or. And it's like, so here's the no, but here's the or.
It's no but. Yeah, it's
like,
no, but we can do this instead.
Exactly. And because even my no but sounds a little like dismissive, where when I say or, it's like my eyes light up. It's like, to me, the no is inviting the or, the better option is.
Yeah.
And
that's a good way to look at it too. So I think that, I hope that we have given you lots of things to think about in terms of what your boundaries in your business will be, or maybe you have boundaries but they're not working for you, so you need to go tweak a little bit.
Tweak them.
But I hope we also left you with some ways to think about how to protect those boundaries as well, because it is really important. And if you don't put boundaries in place,
you're just going to get run over.
You're going to get run over, and you're inviting disrespect, quite frankly. Boundaries, when you have boundaries, people respect that. They may not, there's always going to be jerks, okay? Like, there just is. Of course. But most people will be like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. I respect that. And they'll back off. Or, you know, and it may not mean you're the right person to work with, but at least and there's been tons of times where this has happened to me, where I have wanted to work with somebody or I've wanted to do something and they've just come back with their boundary, and it's like disappointing for me because it's not going to work for me. But at the same time, it's like, you know what? I respect the fact that they were able to stand up and tell me this doesn't work.
Yes, and you would never have known that if you didn't even give it a shot.
Yeah.
So, like,
Whereas,
no harm, no foul. Like,
yeah, I think all those those
yeah,
junior PR people who are emailing me at 11 o'clock at night, their time, it's not that I disrespect them. I know they're just trying to do their job under the expectations that are set upon them, but I
yeah,
certainly disrespect their company that they
yes,
work for.
yes,
'Cause-
absolutely.
So I think that's important to remember too, is that boundaries are about respect as well.
Hmm.
And if you don't ask for respect, if you don't put the boundaries in place, you're not going to earn the respect that you want
Yes.
to have. So
Aretha Franklin said it best.
yes,
R-E-S-P-E-C-T.
Even the next word in that line in that song works. Find out what it means to me. Those are my boundaries.
Exactly.
Yes, there we go. All right, everyone. I think that's it for this week, Heather. I think we
covered a lot.
We covered a lot. Yeah. Okay, everybody. So I think that's it for this week. And I will be back again next week with another brand new episode. And until then, have a great week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.